Hello, welcome everyone to this review for Rise of the Shadows. We're going to be going through the Druid cards now, rating cards on a 1 to 5 scale. You can refer to the comments on the YouTube video to have an explanation of the scale, or refer back to the beginning of our neutrals video. So let's get started with Druid. First up we have Keeper Steladris. Keeper Steladris is a 2-mana 2/3 legendary minion. After you cast a choose one spell, add copies of both choices to your hand. So Keeper Steladris seems to have quite a lot of applications. A lot of the decent, well, let's say quite a few good choose one spells are not, or have rotated since Fandral, which is the most similar type effect we've seen. So I mean, the applications with Keeper Steladris, we're looking at like Wrath. We're looking at the one new 1-mana spell that we'll see. I'm not so sure the applications are that great, but I'm pretty sure Keeper Steladris is a good card by himself. The biggest one that stands out to me is Power of the Wild. In a token Druid type deck, going Keeper Steladris into Power of the Wild seems very, very powerful, because not only do you get another minion, another 2-mana 3/2, you also get another 2-mana spell that buffs your board for +1, which is already a little bit better than the twin spell that we're going to see. So I think Keeper Steladris is a very solid card. Not something we necessarily need to play in all of our Druid decks, but even in like slower Druid decks, if you play this and Nourish in the same turn, yes, that's on 8 mana, so ramping up is probably not that relevant anymore, but it is still pretty powerful effect. I think it's an effect that's going to get better as the year goes on as well, as we get more choose one effects that will get printed. So I think Keeper Steladris is going to be a 4 for me, because I think you're going to see it in a decent amount of Druid decks. Next up we have Lucent Bark. So Lucent Bark is an 8-mana 4/8 with Taunt and Death Rattle. Go dormant. Restore 5 health to awaken this minion. So this seems to be the big payoff for the big end game payoff for the Restore Health deck, other than obviously just outlasting any kind of aggro decks by managing to heal yourself. The issue with Lucent Bark is that realistically you need to probably have more than one of these, because restoring 5 health is not that easy an effect to repeat. Oh, sorry. If we compare this to like Sherazin, which is the Rogue card, the 4-mana 5/3 that also went dormant and then got res by playing 3 spells, it's a little bit harder to res Lucent Bark, I think, unless you've got some lifesteal minions hidden behind it. And that's where Lucent Bark really excels. Lucent Bark can protect your lifesteal minions so that your lifesteal minions can keep resurrecting Lucent Bark. That's the best case scenario. That's the scenario where you're running away with the board and you've pretty much just won the game. I think Lucent Bark is a card that is a very good payoff in those decks, but is probably not enough to push the Restore Health deck by itself. So I'm going to give it a 3, even though if the Restore Health deck is good, it's more of a 4. I think because it is one of the fundamental reasons to play that deck. And that's that's how the ratings work. I just actually don't think we're going to see it seeing much play. So actually, I suppose it should be more of a 2, really, right? If that deck's not viable, then it's only going to really see Fringe play in that Fringe deck. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give Lucent Bark a 2, but I could be very wrong on it. I really do like that they've revisited this Go Dormant effect, though. Next up, we have the other major payoff for the healing deck, Crystal Stagg. Crystal Stagg is a 5-mana 4/4 beast. It's an epic, and it reads Rush, Battle Cry. If you've restored 5 health this game, summon a copy of this. So for 5 mana, you can get 2 4/4s with Rush. That's very powerful. You don't have to restore that 5 health that turn, which is very important. So you can just restore it beforehand on the previous turns. So if we go Crystallizer on 1, that's the best way to facilitate us taking damage in order to actually get to playing Crystal Stagg. And I think Crystallizer is still in Standard. Then we can actually make use of our healing cards some points up to turn 4, and then this is the way that we flip the tempo back in our favor, and then we need to actually kind of push for the win after that. So Crystal Stagg seems like the main reason to try and build the Restore Health deck, quite frankly, even more so than Loosened Bark. Like, yes, Loosened Bark is kind of a late game win condition, but there's probably other late game win conditions that you could just put in that deck and use the Restore Health stuff to get you to those late game win conditions. So I think Crystal Stag is going to get a 3 from me, because I think even outside of the pure healing deck, it could see some play. If some of the cards that can do the healing for you see play, like if you're playing enough lifesteal minions in your token Druid deck, like the 2-mana spell we'll see, or if you're playing the 1-mana spell that can restore 5 health, I think Crystal Stag could see some play in those decks too. So I think I'm going to give Crystal Stag a 3, a better score than we gave Loosened Bark, just because I think it has more versatility out of just the purely heal-based deck. Next up, we have Crystal Song Portal. Crystal Song Portal is a 2-mana epic spell. Discover a Druid minion. If your hand has no minions, keep all 3. So very importantly, this is just Druid minions. Now, Druid minions are not necessarily that amazing. I mean, there's a lot of expensive ones that can be very situational. There's a couple of situational answers that can be good, like Keeper of the Grove, that can silence stuff for you if you need that. There's Druid of the Claw that can be fairly good in a lot of situations. Ancient of War can also be quite good against aggro decks, but the problem being, if you're spending 2 mana to do nothing against aggro decks, you're probably going to need more than just an Ancient of War in the end, and you might not even get to playing that Ancient of War. So I'm just not really sure where this fits in. Like, we could play a Druid deck that's mostly spells, but I'm not really sure what our win condition is in that case. And discovering Druid minions doesn't seem like enough to really make this amazing, unless there's a couple really OP Druid minions I'm not thinking about that we can abuse. So I think I'm going to have to give Crystal Song Portal a 1. A fairly harsh rating, I think. Just because I don't really... I think out of all these effects where like you can draw 3 cards in a way for some mana, you know, comparing it to like Master's Call, Omega Assembly, Raiding Party, those kind of things, it's much worse because unlike Master's Call and Raiding Party, it's not cards you put in your deck. And unlike Omega Assembly, you don't have any other inherent synergy for random Druid minions, because... you know, they're not like mechs, which can synergize with Dr. Boom, for instance, in the late game. So, and you have to fulfill the condition of not having any minions in your hand. So I think that Crystal Song Portal is just a 1. Next up, we have the Forest's Aid. The Forest's Aid is the first of the twin spells we're going to be looking at. So all of the good guy classes, basically, have got these twin spell cards. Twin spell basically means the first time you cast Forest's Aid, you will receive a copy of the card back in your hand that you can cast on any turn going forward. The only difference with that copy is it doesn't have twin spell itself. So basically you're getting 2 copies of the card in 1, but you only have to put 1 copy of the card in your deck. Now that's actually a pretty powerful effect if you think about it. It means when you draw this card, it's kind of like drawing 2 cards. They're 2 of the same card, but that's still powerful. You're kind of able to extend your deck size to 31 without having to actually draw that extra 31st card. So it doesn't help you in fatigue, for that matter, but it does help you in just the value and resource generation. And Forest's Aid, at 8 mana to summon 5 2/2 treants, that's pretty good for value generation. We're getting 10/10 stats for 8. We're getting them split across multiple bodies. Druid has quite a bit of synergy for that. So there's a lot of ways that we can make this into a threat. And if we're holding a Savage Roar, we can play out the first Forest Aid fairly loosely, bait out our opponent's removal, and then play the second one immediately after, where the chances of them having follow-up removal are a lot lower. So that's the really nice thing that I like about Forest's Aid. I think Forest's Aid is actually probably just a 3. I think it's a card that sees play in a lot of versions of the Token Druid deck, and it's kind of like a card you might play one of maybe in your main deck, and then in specialist format for like an anti-control version of your deck you might sideboard in a second copy, or maybe you only sideboard this card in that deck. But I think it is something that could be decent enough, and I think might be one of the best twin spells, quite frankly. And I think is the one that most kind of encourages you to building a very specific deck. We've seen quite a bit of the Treant synergy before with like Mulch Muncher as well. And the other Ancient Speaker or Tree Speaker or something like that is a 5-mana 4/5 that turns all your Treants into 5/5s. That's another very, very good follow-up to the Forest's Aid. The only problem is that those 5/5s obviously can't attack immediately. So unlike Savage Roar, you're not going to end the game by just playing that. So I'm going to give Forest's Aid a 3. I think it could see a bit of play in and out of, especially those type of token Druid decks, whether they be Treant-specific themed or just token Druid themed overall. Next, we have Life Weaver. Life Weaver is a 3-mana 2/5. Rare. Whenever you restore health, add a random Druid spell to your hand. Once again, random Druid cards generally not that good. Random Druid spells, there's a lot of garbage in there too. 3-mana 2/5. Those stats are fairly good. It's reasonable. It's nice extra payoff that you can get for playing the Restore Health deck, but I'm not rushing to even put this in that deck. Because the other problem is with a 2/5, like how often do you even need to restore health? I mean, you're mostly going to be restoring it to the minion, right? That's kind of the idea with Life Weaver here. Like Life Weaver, trades with stuff, and then you kind of restore health to Life Weaver using like the 1-mana spell that we'll see upcoming. I mean, then you can keep your minions alive, because if Life Weaver is sticking around on the board, you probably don't need to heal your face much, because your face probably hasn't taken much damage. So that's kind of the issue I have with Life Weaver. I think I'm going to only just give it a 2, because the random Druid spell effect is just not that good when the condition you have to fill is just not that easy. Next up, we have Dreamy Guardians. Dreamy Guardians is a 2-mana rare spell. Summon 2 1/2 Dryads with Lifesteal. Now, I think this might be the best Druid card in the set. I think I'm going to give this a straight up 4, because I think it's one of the main reasons to go into the token Druid archetype, and it nicely crosses over with the restoring health archetype as well, in the sense that the Lifesteal is one of the best ways to restore health, because it's a repeatable effect on minions, and it's easy enough to imagine us going Dreamy Guardians into some buffs or something, and then we get to that having restored 5 health condition by the time we can play our Crystal Stagg, and we're really managing to control the board very nicely like that. So I think I really like Dreamy Guardians. It's one of the main forces, I think, that's going to try and help push Druid back into this kind of token Druid style, and that's probably going to be the best hope for Druid going forward. Druid, once again, they got a lot of their cards nerfed. Naturalized rotating out now as well into Hall of Fame, and they also are losing Spreading Plague, which is by far the biggest loss to any of the token Druid decks, and that's a huge issue. So I mean, we're left with like Whispering Woods stuff, and Soul of the Forest, Savage Roar stuff, but I think the token Druid deck is not going to be anywhere near its pomp when it could actually play Spreading Plague and Morfurion and stuff like that alongside your ultimate infestations. So I think this is the great big hope for token Druid going forward, but token Druid overall, probably not necessarily looking a shadow of its former self. Next, we have Cornbearer. Cornbearer is an 8-mana. Cornbearer is a 1-mana 2/1 common. With Death Rattle, add 2 1/1 squirrels to your hand. So I think this is actually a good card for the token Druid deck, because the 1/1s that it adds to your hand help fuel Whispering Woods. I think that's an important thing to consider with this card. And I think that's kind of the main reason, the main deck I would want to play it in. But ultimately, a 1-mana 2/1 that gives you basically 2 1-drops is very good. It's kind of like a Firefly in a way. Very different stat distributions, and Firefly wouldn't have been as good in Druid if it was a 2/1, let's say, as a 1/2, because the 1/2 worked better for the future buffing stuff. But in this case, you're getting 2 1/1s to work with the buffing. So I think Cornbearer is actually a pretty good card. I'm going to give Cornbearer a 4, because I think it's probably one of the cards that helps propel that Druid archetype going forward. It's very hard for a 1-drop to be like, deck defining in the way that we kind of talk about 1-drops. 4-rated cards. And it's also not a card that's going to see that much play outside of those token Druid decks, I don't think, necessarily. Unless we have some kind of mid-range Druid deck generally, it could be okay in that. So it's difficult to give it a 4, but I think I'm giving it a 4 just to emphasize how important it'll be to that token Druid archetype. Next up, we have Blessing of the Ancients, another twin spell. This is a 3-mana common spell. Twin spell, give your minions +1/+1. So you're paying 1 more extra over the over Power of the Wild to give your minions +1/+1. The upside is you get another copy of this to your hand. So you can spend 6 mana to give all your minions +2/+2. You can split that over multiple turns, which can be powerful. This is another card that actually synergizes quite well with the 1 mana 1/1 neutral that restores 2 health to your minions. If you, Blessing of Ancients, manage to make some favorable trades, then the next turn you play that 1-drop that heals all your stuff, and then you can Blessing of Ancients again and make more favorable trades. You should really be able to run away with the board like that. But ultimately, Blessing of the Ancients is not the best buff I want to play. A lot of the time, Soul of the Forest is better because it ensures you against AoE in a way that just buffing your minions doesn't really do. But I think Blessing of the Ancients could actually be fairly powerful. But I'm just going to rate it at a 3 because I don't really think it's enough to propel that token Druid deck forward. But I do think it will be a card we want to probably play at least 1 copy of in most of our token Druid decks. And then I think finally we have Crystal Power. Crystal Power is a spell that we've constantly referred to, actually. It's a 1-mana common spell. Choose 1, deal 2 damage to a minion, or restore 5 health. So this is the card that will help proc all of your restore 5 health requirements. Most obviously Crystal Stagg and Loosened Bark. 1 mana to activate those effects makes them a lot more viable. At 1 mana to deal 2 damage to a minion, that's fairly reasonable as well to help you contest the early game. And it synergizes very well with what's his name? Keeper Steladris. Because you get 2 cards in your hand, works with the whole Whispering Woods thing. Dealing 2 damage to a minion helps you control the board, so you can play Steladris into Crystal Power and have an immediate effect on the board, as well as getting some more cards back to your hand. It's not as good as Wrath or Power of the Wild with Keeper Steladris, but it might see a little bit of play. It's not really going to help in like a Gadgets and Auctioneer type way, because the type of Gadgets and Auctioneer Druid decks we saw before were the Mechathune decks, and those are not really viable as Naturalizers rotating out now. So I'm not really sure Crystal Power is good enough of a heal. You need much more repeatable heals for cards like Loosened Bark in particular. But I think Crystal Power could be decent enough to see some Fringe play in those decks. So I'm going to just give Crystal Power a 2. So overall, having a quick look at Druid, I think the big thing that sticks out to me is Token Druid. I think that's going to be the main force for Druid going forward. The loss of Spreading Plague is a massive problem to that archetype, because now you can't just... it's very difficult to threaten your opponents. It's very difficult to stop your opponents from threatening your life resource whilst you're trying to go wide on the board. You have to kind of constantly make these value trades, which is why I think that the buffs are going to be super important. Power of the Wild, possibly the Blessing of Ancients, and also the Treant synergy. We might finally see that kind of come into play. Obviously, Living Mana rotates out, which was one of the best Treant generating cards as well. So we're going to have to see if the Twin Spell can kind of replace that. Overall, I think Druid is going to be one of the better aggressive decks at fighting for the board. That's kind of always been its place. It's going to be better at generating more minions on the board than most other aggressive decks. So I think that's really where we're going to see Druid excelling. I think fighting for the board a lot with Shaman and Zoo in particular. Overall, I think Druid, not so bad, but they're losing so many powerful cards that they're in a really terrible state right now. They're also losing Twig of the World Tree, which kind of shuts down the Malagos Druid quite a bit, and also losing King Togwaggle, which shuts down the Mill Druid stuff. And obviously the Naturalize is a massive loss for Druid when that rotates out. So I think Druid overall is not going to be in a very good place, but Token Druid might have a way to fight into the meta if those other aggro decks are popular that it can counter. That's all we have for Druid. Next up, we're going to have Hunter. Make sure you like and subscribe. Do all that stuff if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on Twitch, just give a shout out and chat. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find the link just underneath my face there.